Welcome to Navigating Complexity with hosts Matt McDonnell and Dan Dillard. In this episode, we enter the intricate world of entrepreneurship, personal growth, and finding purpose amid life's challenges with guest Dr. Mellie Price. Dr. Mellie Price shares her fascinating journey from her roots in science to becoming a trailblazing entrepreneur and educator. Together, they explore how life's complexities, both professional and personal, shape who we are and how we navigate the world. If you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a seasoned professional, or simply someone curious about the crossroads of life and leadership, this conversation offers valuable insights and inspiration.
Welcome to Navigating Complexity, episodes 7, 8?
8, I think.
8. And excited to open up conversations with Mellie Price in the house. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Mellie.
And so we were already starting to jump into navigating complexity conversations, and I wanted to get us started so we can put it on camera. You were mentioning, and we'll just gonna jump right back in. You were talking about there's various areas of navigating complexity. There's professional life, and that hasn't been something that you've seen as much challenge, more the intrapersonal. And obviously, we're just kind of curious because everybody has different things that they struggle with. And so, but before we jump into that, can you just talk a little bit about who you are, what you're doing now, how you got here, that kind of stuff?
Sure. How I got here is probably complex if I have to tell the story, but yeah. When you're living it, it doesn't feel that way. But
right.
I started. I'm the child of an engineer and an English teacher, and I probably embody equal parts of that. So I started life, my professional life, as a scientist. I went to the University of Texas. I studied biology after changing majors from chemical engineering or, some STEMmy based things. And, really realized while I have a knack for those things and I'm kind of wired in a problem solving way, they weren't really fueling my being.
Yeah.
And candidly, it's been a life journey to figure out what is that right balance and connection between the way my brain thinks and who I want to be in the world.
Yeah.
And so went to school, studied science and kind of bounced my way into entrepreneurship because I did not want to go get a PhD and work in a lab, which was kind of the track that I would have been on, and ended up right time, right place with regard to developing technical skills and the launch and the commercialization of the internet.
I think that's interesting in that you're like, dad was engineer, mom was school teacher. I mean,
English teacher, yeah.
And then out of that, entrepreneurship, because neither one of them were in entrepreneurship, or were they?
It's funny that you asked that because it's sort of an ongoing debate in my family. Did I get my entrepreneurial prowess from my mom or from my dad?
Mm-hmm.
And I think everybody assumes it was my dad because he was a successful businessman, was a CEO, but he was a mining engineer and a little bit on the risk averse side of life. Very creative. I find a lot of scientific people and programmers are quite creative. But my mom was the one that was selling Mary Kay.
Oh, was she? Okay.
And, trying to start a one of those shops where you can pack your materials and send out stuff.
Hustles going.
She had the itch to go kind of make something herself.
Right. Okay.
And she thinks entrepreneurially. So probably got a little bit from
both.
That's really cool. I just wanted to pull on that thread a little bit because I'm always curious, where the entrepreneurial itch comes from, because sometimes it's directly related to what parents are doing. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's I went this way, and it sounds like you've got a little bit from both.
I'll be honest. I think my entrepreneurial itch came from fear.
What do you mean?
Yeah. Not probably I don't know if it's something I would actually, now that I think about being on camera, maybe I don't want to talk about it. But,
we can edit.
I feel like so many young people, we have, you reach that age if you've been privileged enough to go to college, there's a social pressure to become, right? To launch as an adult and have a career. And the reality was I hadn't yet found what I wanted. I didn't go into college directionally speaking, like, I'm going to get this degree, I'm going to come out, I'm going to do this thing.
Right.
I also graduated into a not great economy. And so, I had a lot of fear. I came out in my early 20s, and I didn't know how my family would react to that. I lived in a conservative state.
Yeah.
I didn't quite know that my life was going to be okay at that young and tender age. And I knew I needed to provide for myself. And so I think I started programming and developing technical skills because it was something that I knew I could develop a job. I was doing all the things you do when you're a young person trying to find work. And I just didn't see that working long term. So it's very practical and very fear-based that drove me to develop the skill set that then served me in building companies.
So the fear both, it sounds like, and back to what we originally started chatting about, interpersonal but also economic, right? Because you graduated into something that the economy that wasn't there for you, which so many people are like, oh, did all this work and we think we're going to do this. And then you come out and where's the job? So,
yeah.
But it's really interesting though, because I often hear people talk about fear cutting in the other direction, which is against
keeping them
indulging their entrepreneurial goals, right? How did that actually feel at the time?
It's a great question because I now, as somebody who teaches, I do see people not go after their dreams because of that fear. But, for me, I really didn't see an alternative. So when I say it was fear-based, it was like, well, I tried a few jobs, but I just literally could not see myself sitting in a cubicle at a corporation. I couldn't see myself doing the same thing day in and day out. So while it felt scary, not knowing where the paycheck was coming from, it was also really invigorating. And, a lot of that energy that we get from being entrepreneurs was present. I just didn't call myself an entrepreneur. I was just a young person trying to make my way in the world. Now we have a name for it, and we have programs for it, and people start working on those skills when they're in high school. But, I'm of a generation where I was just carving my own path. That's what it felt like to me.
What's interesting about what you say, what you said about people not chasing their dreams or not, is that there's a fear on both sides. Kind of what we were discussing is this fear of economy and making it in business, but there's also this fear of not knowing oneself, right? Because I understand exactly what you're saying, where there's this calling inside and you've got to see what that is. And some people will squash that for a paycheck, right? And so, and I have found with all the entrepreneurial interviews I've had over the years, it's probably 350 or so by now, but I find this special thing that entrepreneurs have, and I've got it as well. I think everybody in the room has it, is just this, you got to discover this thing that's inside that's got to come out. And it just feels wrong if you don't chase it. It just feels like I can't, just what you just said, as I can't be in a cubicle not pursuing this thing, and it's hard to describe, but it's there. And so that's a common thread I've seen among many entrepreneurs that have described the same feeling.
So it's interesting though, right? Because I also think the outside perspective is when you're an entrepreneur, you have this idea that you're just burning with and you have to do it and there's nothing else that, matters, right? But I think what you just described is closer to my experience, where you realize what's not for you early, and then you spend decades clunking around looking for what is and trying to answer that question, right? And that's sort of the magic of it, right? It's like that, what happens in between, making that decision and then ultimately figuring out the answer to that question, or at least I think so.
Well, and I want to get back to you, but just to put on that thread a little bit, I've discovered that over my career in life, it's, you don't know what that often is, but it's building to something. And you can always look back and say, oh, that's why I did that.
Yeah.
Because I needed that knowledge to do what I need to do today. And you just can't, you're just kind of feeling around, but to your point, it doesn't feel right working for anybody else because you don't have that freedom to at least explore.
I always say, you never know where the magic happens. And I think that part of being an entrepreneur is like, it's that the attributes of insatiable curiosity. I think we have this false narrative. I mean, I think it exists for some people, that like acute directionality where I have an idea and a vision and I must go pursue this. But more often than not, it's a windy, messy path.
Yeah.
And you have to have insatiable curiosity to turn over every possibility and explore and align and, figure out what's going to fit. And in that process, you don't know where the magic is going to happen. And so I think that's what drove me. That's really fun. It's fun. It's fulfilling. It's intellectually stimulating. It introduces you to new people, places, things, possibilities. And for me, it's been an interwoven journey with, who I want to be, how I want to walk through the world, lessons that I've learned in interpersonal dynamics that create that shift. So ultimately, I think I was a very naive greenhorn kind of person just trying to figure out their way in the world. And then before you know it, you wake up and people are like, oh, she's an entrepreneur. And I'm like,
oh. Yeah. Kind of happens
I've
to
arrived.
you, right? Yeah. It's funny that when you say like, oh, and you have an idea and you just must pursue it. I was like, that happens to me like 20 times a month. And then, but
yeah.
and then I stop, right? But that's what that sort of insatiable curiosity is like, oh, no, that's not actually a very good path to go down, right? And that maps a little bit more closely with my experience.
Well, you're testing.
Yeah.
And that's just testing. That's just like, I've got this idea that might work, and you go test for a bit, and nah, that wasn't it. Keep going.
Right.
And I, like many things in life, I think there's different paths to the ultimate, path of being an entrepreneur. There's different ways of getting there. It's like some people are fantastic operators, and they get an idea and they can see how to execute it and operationalize it differently. And they go build great companies doing that. And then there's other people, and I put myself in this bucket, who see a problem. I have an acute sensibility about understanding where there's enough of a problem that a behavioral change would manifest in the people that would buy the product or the service or whatever it is. But I'm not like a mission target operator kind of person. I have to surround myself with those people. And I think you come at building companies and building great products and great companies and, different ways. And they're both valid. They're just different. And I think we see that reflected in venture capital funds, where you have people who are, more operators, and you have people who are more ideators. So it's taken me a long time to come to that, because again, going back to the fear, I grew up with the expectation that I should be both. You should have the excellent idea and, great tactics. And it's like a coming to know yourself, to know when you're maybe stronger at one than the other. It's a rare bird that's both.
It's so rare. That's what I was going to say. I mean, your chances of actually having both of those skills in spades is very, very low.
Yeah. We talked about that in our last episode when you were asking, how does one become this? I'm like, I'm not sure you do. But you get really good at that part of what you do. And I want to ask a question here that maybe goes back to some of the interpersonal, because here's what I find, because I find myself as an entrepreneur to be very much in that same boat as you, which is like, I don't know exactly how I'm going to get there, but I know I'm going to get there. And what it's meant for me has been a lot of interpersonal growth, a lot of kind of reflection, a lot of introspective, a lot of meditation, a lot of like, how does life actually work? And then, so many things that I've heard over the last 20, 30 years, these sayings come back like, oh, that's what that meant. And you're like, now I get it. Now I get some of these things, like, when you speak into existence, or you just
Right.
you've got to, like, and so that's been part of the journey for me, is not only the vision, but it's also looking inside and knowing that I can make this change. And when you were like, you tell your kids, you can be president if you want, or you can, like, whatever you want to do. Sure. You think about that, but you actually can. I mean, you can speak these things. You can set your target and go, and not have the answers of how you're going to get there, and things will fold in.
And enjoy the journey.
Exactly.
I wish we would tell our kids, you don't have to want to be president.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because definitely, the climb the hill, be the pinnacle, be the founder, be the, like, yeah, that's a great journey in it, but it's also a completely legitimate career to be somebody who supports, who is excellent operationally and supports those things. And yeah. I was sort of chuckling there for a minute, because you made it sound so peaceful and graceful with your meditation and self-reflection. Mine has been more like crash, bang. Oh, I shouldn't do that again.
It's funny too. The way I say it is, you're wasting 80% of your time. You just don't know which 80% it is, and so you might as well enjoy it, right? Like, it has to be something that you actually like the day-to-day reality of.
I think it's the older you get, the more you realize that, okay, I don't have to stress so much about things, because it'll all be okay.
Yeah.
But it took plenty of, like, hitting myself against my head against the wall to be like, all right. I think we're, and these are some of the sayings that come to mind, light touch, or let go of the wheel, or things. And these, over time, they make sense, because I think that we have this, at least in my experience, you have this thing like, I'm going to be the change. I'm going to make all the change happen. You have this false sense of control.
Yeah.
And there's so much more that impacts this, that if you like, all right, I have an intention, I'll have light touch, and just kind of keep seeing what unfolds. And that's just kind of been just nothing but experience has taught me that. But then I go back and hear some of these words, like, oh, that's what that meant afterwards. But yeah, I've had plenty of hitting my head against the wall. So we're on the same page there.
I think about those things, like, I got feedback when I was younger. I came up in a period of time where, kind of information was power, and there wasn't this culture of transparency and collaboration that is so beautiful in business today, and is so beautiful in Austin. I mean, that's just something that is, if you work outside of the ecosystem here, you learn that really quickly.
Right.
But I feel like the light touch and, some of those things that show up in life as maybe micromanagement or controlling or bull in a china shop or too direct. I've gotten that feedback a lot. You're very direct, and I've had to learn to be both direct and compassionate, as opposed to just direct, or direct with a sledgehammer. And teaching has been a wonderful gift in that regard, of learning, how to give somebody feedback, because you genuinely want them to be better. But when it shows up hard and not gentle,
they're not receiving it. Yeah.
I think for me, that was that fear. It was that fear, that motivating function of, oh, I have to prove my value. I have to show I'm capable. It's all that stuff that you get as a young person, because you're still finding your way in the world and proving yourself. At least, this is my personal experience, obviously. But I see that with a lot of younger people who they don't feel adequate just in being where they are in life. And that's the gift of some age, is that you get to the point where you're like, I actually don't have to have all the answers all the time. And I actually don't have to pick up everything that's put in front of me to do, So that journey has been,
I think
a wild ride.
I think
and it's great to be older.
Exactly.
It gets easier.
You said this in our last, I think you said this in our last podcast about what's the best lesson or the best value or the best book, and you're like experience. Isn't that what
Yeah.
Because that's what it is at the end of the day. It's just the age and experience, but completely get and agree with what you're saying there. I recently read a book called Levels of Consciousness, which just kind of puts these qualities in life into different levels, and it made a lot of sense for me. One of the lower levels was this ego, and then you kind of move beyond that into love and all the things. And how I associated with what you just said was that when we're younger, it is like we don't know a whole lot. We're just trying to acquire knowledge. We're trying to be valuable. We want
to matter.
We want to do all these, and there's fear around, not. And that's where this whole fake it till you make it kind of thing, because you're just like, I'm not. I don't know if people know who I am and that kind of stuff. And so there's this whole ego thing. And at some point that you get to the next level and the ego is not as a big a deal. But I think that a lot of those fears, a lot of those, you're chuckling for some reason.
Yeah. Sounds nice.
Sounds nice.
I mean, if you can get there. I mean, it's interesting too. You kind of, you made this comment about how you had this ability to sort of see the behavior change, right? Or be attuned to the behavior change. And so I was just curious, like when you're out there learning, technical skills, right? And then like, what was the thing that made you say, okay, I know what I need to know now to go take this leap, right? I have this conviction to start a business because I feel strongly enough about this behavior change. Yeah. Like, how did you go that first leap, right? What was the thing that made you able to do that?
The fact that it wasn't a leap.
How so?
It wasn't a conscious decision to leap. It was, here's the opportunity. I need to manifest this opportunity, and therefore I'm going to go for it. I think it's, I always tell, students, like, you'll never be at a time in your life where it's easier to take risk, right? You don't have kids, you don't have some of the things that come with time. And I think for me, you have to remember, I started my first company very young and was lucky enough to have some success young enough that it set me up to be able to do it later. And so I absolutely own that I had the privilege of success young enough that I could afford to keep swinging at the plate.
Yeah.
And so my journey is not one that felt like I made this like huge leap. And I see friends and colleagues and people, when I'm looking at deals, and I'm like, that is so amazing. You have 3 kids at home and you are taking an enormous risk to pursue your dream. Like, I have so much respect for that, because that wasn't my journey. Not to say I haven't taken risks and made huge sacrifices to become what I've become, but it just didn't look like that.
Yeah.
For me, it just wasn't.
It's a gradual.
It wasn't a consciousness.
Yeah.
It just was the way it had to be.
Yeah. And do you, because I find this too, that if you have those experiences early, right, then you sort of choose to continue to live your life in a way where you're ready to take risk. Was that your experience too?
Yes. And in terms of, I think of the theme of the podcast being navigating complexity, those are where my biggest challenges have been. It's like, do I continue? Do I do my 8th startup? Right. I mean, sounds ridiculous, but at some point, after starting Front Gate Tickets, and, we had gotten to a certain size, and the company absolutely could and probably should run without me. And I'm contemplating, I'm not on the planet to be the CEO of a ticket company. What am I? Right. And those are the journeys where you're in the midst of either extraordinary success or extraordinary failure. And do you choose to persist, or do you choose to switch gears? And and all the things that touch that decision, from your family relationships to your career relationships, and those are the hard things in my mind. I don't want to frame them as hard, actually. Now that I think about that, those are the most complex.
I'm gonna throw a question and make it esoteric, and because we've already gone down this thread. Is a business a byproduct of you finding yourself? Because so many people think the business is life.
That the business is
life. That is my purpose, is to establish this thing. So, so many people closely identify themselves with the business purpose. And I love what you just said. Am I on this world to be the CEO of this ticket company, or am I to this next thing? So what I heard was, that was what you did. It was a byproduct of what your search, which is still continuing.
Yeah. Well, I'm always going to push back against any kind of platitude, because I just think it can happen different ways. In my case, my evolution from that was a byproduct of my search. I mean, when I think about how did I come to start Frontgate Tickets, was, I loved music. I loved that community. I wanted to work in it. I had these technical skills that I developed out of college.
Mm-hmm.
I had a few clients. They came together in if I create a ticketing software platform, I can make a living.
Yeah.
And so that was an evolution of finding myself and figuring out whether or not I wanted to have a career in that space. And then other things, I do think it's less about finding yourself and more about, maybe finding yourself in the operational excellence is part of that. But I think it can happen either way.
Yeah, and probably 3 or 4 others, right? I don't know. I think you're right, and I also don't. I don't know that anybody ever actually finds themselves, right? It's sort of looking. The looking search matters, yeah, and that's how you kind of get on to the next thing. But
it's like a dog chasing its tail. It's like, what? I caught it?
Yeah. Exactly. Then you catch the bumper, and you're like, well, here we go. I'm the CEO of a ticketing company, right? Yeah. Or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
And it's been some, I would say, pretty harsh. It's taken me some pretty harsh nudges to get off that path. Like, you get on it and you're like, okay, we've built this great company. It's set in stone. I'm operating, leading, but a big part of my mind, that insatiably curious mind, is like, what about this? Mm-hmm. And what if we went this way? And by then you've got this big ship and not everybody wants to go that direction. And,
right.
Do you want to spend your time and energy trying to get your board of directors or your whoever to go that way? And for me, that's typically when I think this is not my sweet spot. Like, I don't want to go fight those fights. They don't fuel me. I want to go solve new problems, and stay engaged.
That's really cool. Back to, one of the comments you said originally is like, life and doing the work and teaching stuff has seemed like this gradual path for you, not as complex as what the show is, but more so on the life side. I'd love to learn more about that, because so many people that are going to be listening to the podcast are going to face complexity in both life and business. So what were some of the things that you've faced? I mean, you mentioned some, like coming out at a young age, family, state, all that kind of stuff. How did you navigate through that made you okay? Like, you're like, I'm okay now that I pushed through that. Because I feel like so many things in life, I look at them like we're at a game. I tell my daughter this, is like, we're a game of Donkey Kong and the barrel's coming down. You got to run as fast as you can to jump over it to get to the next thing and to get to the next level. And that's what life is.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter if it's interpersonal or business, whatever it is. Just if the problem's coming your way, don't run away from it. Run towards it, jump over it, get around it, and get to the next thing. Anyway, it's just
the most challenging things for me have been things that don't have absolutes. So, I started Frontgate Tickets right after my 37-year-old brother died of a heart attack. And, it's just one of those things. It's like, I'm watching my parents lose a child. I'm watching me lose my only sibling. he was the healthiest guy in the family and died of a heart attack.
Wow.
So what does that mean to
Right.
all of us? And, am I going to have a short life? And like you start to navigate all those questions that come up when something is, when the barrel is inserted in your Donkey Kong and life comes at you. And so, it's like losing my brother at 31 for me, 37 for him. How did that shape me? Who did I become? I learned a lot about that. It changed the family dynamic, navigating that. And then, I waited until much later in life to get married and, thought I had done that well and that I picked a really great person and, invested very heavily in becoming a stepmom and, raising a daughter as if she were my own, and then literally instantly overnight gone because the person decided they were no longer in that life and had an affair and ran off with the, business law partner and things like that. And so, it feels like it's happening to you.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the moments that, shape you. And then of course, losing a parent and things like that. So I think the most transformative times in my life have been when the barrels have been inserted into my game of life. And you're like, oh shit, this is a double barrel.
Right. Yes.
And,
yes.
You get through it the best you can. And then there's some time of reflection afterward where you think, thank God I am not still married to that person. Right. And thank God, you start to realize the gifts that come from, that's, I think one of the tropes is the silver linings, right?
Yeah.
Since you've thrown out almost every altruism, it's like, oh, there's always a silver lining in these hard things. My experience is that they're really, for the most part, there have been silver linings. And then it's are you insatiably curious to go figure out how that silver lining is going to manifest into your life and being the person that you want to be. And now I look back at those barrels and I think, of course I miss my brother, but his death changed the trajectory of my life in a beautiful way. It's brought me closer to his widow, who is a cherished member of my family now. And, thank heavens I'm not married to somebody who lacked the integrity to, treat our marriage and even the decline of a marriage with respect. And, business partners who have died. I've had 2 business partners die, and in the moment you think,
Right.
And then you realize the new chapter that opens every time. What do we have? Windows that close, a new door opens every time one closes. So this theme can go a long way, but those have by far been the most complex navigations because it's interplaying elements of who you are, who you think you're supposed to be, how you think you're supposed to be treated, how you treat others, spiritual components, and there's no answers.
Right.
So those are the ones for me where it's like there's no absolutes.
Yeah.
And you never get the satisfaction of I did that well.
Right.
I navigated that well.
Yeah. Well put. Right. I really love that because you're right. You go build a business and it's successful and you can put a pin on it and say, I did that. And that was
you
success.
either did or did exit it. And it either did or didn't have millions of dollars associated with it.
Right. But in life, it's like, okay. And I love that because I go through a lot of that myself, the spirituality. And, recently, earlier this year, lost my mom. And that was the end of the era, right? And so you're like, okay, how do I? And so, it and you do have all the questions in your head. And you're like, okay, how does that affect your decisions? And as you were saying these things about your brother, I was just thinking about how my life has shifted, about caring more for dad and caring more for my brother, and just like being more present because you're like everything shifts for you. And so, I totally get that.
It's interesting when you kind of push back on the word hard. And I was thinking about that while you were talking, because for me, that experience of the barrel sort of feels like you can't just work harder, right? Like the fire hose is on and everything is coming at you. And so You're not going to do it all. You're not going to solve all the problems. Like there's no complete solution here. And that's what's hard about it, is you got to decide which chunk of this thing that's coming at you you're actually going to deal with and what you're going to ignore. And, that is not a question of what should I do professionally, right? It's a whole lot more consuming. And you're right. Like those are the things that you're like, I often find that the things I choose or choose not to do in those situations, like that's the real lesson. Like, oh, that thing was really important to me because when the shit hit the fan, that was the thing I anchored in. Or like that stuff I used to think matters doesn't actually matter at all to me because when the ship was going down, I didn't even think about that thing.
And isn't it cool to witness what shows up in the face of that? So, kind of the ripple effects of these complex navigations, like when you're in it or when it's your life and your career, you can be very self-focused with the narrative, but really a lot of these things, the ripples, like having watched my mom lose a son, having watched my closest friends be devastated by actually being left. I was left as the person who was married, but the friends and the community that we had built were left completely in the dust. And they have their own grief. And then how does that change the relationship? In some cases you become closer, in some cases you lose friends, or businesses that fail. You've been in the trenches with your co-founders, and the ripple effect of something succeeding or failing. And we sold a business, and like I have a partner I have almost never talked to again. We didn't have a negative relationship, just like that chapter was over and they've moved on. And navigating how you do or don't stay in touch with friends over time. There's a lot of nuance that goes into just, we become busy people. Our lives become more complex as we age. We have chapters of our lives. We have good things and bad things. And, all of that in the milieu is like, well, time just makes things more complex. And yet, the older I get, the more simple it feels.
Right. As you were talking about that, I was thinking about some earlier statements. And earlier when I said, when you're younger, the ego and everything, is because that's all you've got. You're like, who am I? You're still trying to figure this out. And that's why it's such a big deal in your life.
Yeah.
But as you go through all of this, you're like, those things don't matter.
That is exactly right.
It is everything else that I've gone through that. And now when you face a barrel coming down, you're like, it's just another barrel.
Just a barrel.
Yeah, you're just going to do this or do that. Or you've done so much weaving and bobbing and everything else. You're like, this is how we'll face it. And it just doesn't stress you out like it used to back when you were 20.
Yeah. And that's when I've been able to see the gifts of the challenging things. But you've got a moment in time when you can see it and you can't force it. Like a friend of mine, and I always say, when you know. And you don't know a minute earlier.
No, that's what I was gonna say. Is like I've never had the experience of feeling wise in the moment, right? Like those emotions are real, right? And you're like, oh my God, it's actually hopeless, right? And it's only in hindsight when you're like, no, that's what I chose to do, right? And I don't know. It's very interesting.
But you don't think that your decisions get that you face some of the same things again. You're like, I know how to deal with it now. So it's not as like some things might have kept you up at night before. And now they're like, they don't. Keep
for sure. But I think, so like the thing that I think is hard right now is that the older I get and the more mistakes I've made, the more I realize that I just might be wrong about everything I think, right? And so, like, I'll give you an example. Like, for years, I've thought, mistaking what you think is important for what other people think is important. I make that mistake constantly, and I just made it in my marriage a week ago, and I was like, oh, I thought you valued autonomy as much as I did, right? And I just want to be left alone to do this project, right? And it's like, well, why would you treat me this way? And it's like, No. This is just me, right? This is just how I want to be treated, and not everybody else has to behave that way. And I think that I don't know. I have and I have that experience, like 100 times a year, and I feel dense about it. But I guess that's and there's other ways that manifests itself too, in professional situations where you realize, there's always a bigger fish, or, there's this huge part of the market you weren't aware of, or there's a customer segment that's underserved, right? Like that you never even thought of before. So I don't know, I guess the more experience I have, the more those experiences pile up for me. And I don't know. I think that's pretty humbling. Right. Yeah. Like you want to kill your ego, right? Right. It's, my experience of getting older is I just become more aware of how ignorant I am.
The older you get, the more,
even though I'm actually learning, a whole lot more objectively.
Yeah. No. I think it's a great thing. It's a great thing to kind of like what you said, the older you get, the less you know. It's because you realize the world is much bigger and there's other things, and there's people think different. You said earlier, the hard part of navigating is humans. It's just other humans. Yeah, it's other humans.
We're complex little creatures. Mm-hmm. We have all the feelings and agendas and, things that maybe even that we're not conscious about that show up, and you just never know. You never know where the magic happens.
Yeah. One of the things that I tell, I've got a 21-year-old, and obviously always mentoring and parenting, and one of the things that I tell her is like, we all have the universe in our own head. Every one of us has a different universe in our own head, and we all grew up differently. You grew up differently than we did. Even though we have love and community and commonality, we don't see things the same way. Even if it's your own daughter, you don't ever see things the same way. We're just not built that way. And so that's where that's where the difficulty is. It's like assumptions that you see it my way. And it's like, nope, that's not the way it is. And being able to have that grace between me, between this person and this person, there's this big space of grace and saying, I don't know exactly how you're seeing it. So.
And I found so much joy in my, 5th, 6th, 7th chapter of career, getting the opportunity to teach, which I know you have also done, Matt, and now helping to shape the ecosystem of entrepreneurship on the University of Texas at Austin campus. Mm-hmm. And I see these young people a lot, often get asked the question, what would you tell your younger self? And, what's your vision for what you're doing now? And I just feel like the most you can do, like somebody could listen to this podcast and hear these threads and these, altruisms that get put out there, and you simply can't connect to them till you've had the experience that allows you to connect to them. And so I found so much joy in realizing all I can do is create the ecosystem for the experiences and step away. And as somebody evolves, pivots, changes, you might have somebody who starts as a founder who fails and they don't want to do it again, and they become a great McKinsey consultant, or you may have somebody who's like, I went and got my JD degree and I don't want to be a big law attorney, and now I'm figuring out how do I bring that training to start a career or be a part of a company or something like that. And it's like, all you can do is create the petri dish for the growth tap. And that's a biologist in me. And
that's what I was going to say. It's so funny. I don't know that anybody other than a biologist would think of it that way. Right. And it's such a good example of what's
you're
saying.
Grow is going to grow,
Yeah. Like without that experience, you wouldn't necessarily even have that lens.
Yeah. And I think of metaphors like when I'm an aquatic biologist. It's like these estuaries where the little fish and the little creatures live until they're safe to go out to sea, or, or they're part of that ecosystem. It's like, that's where I am in life, is what does that for me and who can I do that for? I'm on a journey with aging parents. I lost my dad earlier this year, caretaking for mom with severe dementia. And I'm a guppy in that world. Yeah. And there's so many people that have gone before me and who have surrounded me and just watched me take that journey. And they're not telling me what to do. Some of them try to tell you what to do. And I'm sure I do that to my students sometimes, but they're just there when you need it. And that to me is like, from a career perspective, to be adept at navigating how to be the right resource at the right time, has been
Right.
that's the art that I've been working on. And it, I think it'll be a life's work in progress. And if I do it well at all, I will be pleased with that, because it's very hard.
It's such an important point too, that you can sometimes be the big fish and sometimes be the guppy, right?
Oh,
At the
yeah.
same time in different domains. And I think I've seen a lot of students in particular get mixed up about needing to be the big fish in whatever particular domain. And you're like, no. The real power is, being vulnerable and
Right.
coming at that with a beginner's mindset, because then you'll get out there, right? You'll be better set up to do it.
People will take your calls when you're
That's right.
a student because they want to help you, but they won't when you're...
They will not do that when you're out in the world.
Yeah.
Well, I love the perspective, and I can't agree more. I mean, it's like every layer you're going in. It's you're growing at the same time others are growing. Again, going back to parenting or teaching, they're going through a certain level, and you're growing at the same time, but just a kind of a different thing. It's just like wonderful mentorship. How that everyone's at the same time growing at different things. So just a beautiful thing. One last question. I know we're getting close in time. This has been it feels like such a quick discussion.
Yeah, I know this has really gone fast. Thank you for joining us.
But one last question is, or at least I've got, you can obviously, if you got any others, I just want to learn more about your experiences at UT, like what you're doing now at UT, so that audience knows what you're doing, and then how that's, what things you're learning there. You touched on it a little bit, but I'm just more interested in.
I learned so much. I joined the university about 8.5 years ago. And I think about the journey and what I've learned, and then navigating this ecosystem that does not operate the way the private sector does.
Right.
And the business model of education, the value proposition of higher education has been under fire for a while. And so, when I graduated, if you had a bachelor's degree, probably found a job. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of table stakes now. And you really, a master's or a PhD is going to distinguish you in the way that a bachelor's did. And so what I'm doing now is really just trying to build the tools and the resources, like I said, to connect students, faculty, staff, even the alumni and the outside community to this asset known as the University of Texas at Austin. When I look back at the companies that I started, mm-hmm. I think about, there's so many, like the university's such a great platform for building businesses and building careers. And it's really underutilized, right? Like historically, it was, you got a degree and your degree program connected you to the corporations that hire people with those degrees.
Right.
And that, of course, is an important element of setting students up. But what we're realizing is more students come into university now with a goal of starting their own companies, right, or working in early stage mm-hmm. technology, small companies, community, things that have global sustainability. Those are needs now that haven't always been there. And so we don't do as strong of a job as we could doing that. And there's an important window happening right now where we have the opportunity to be one of the highest impact, or the highest impact, public research university in the nation. There's a big shift between public and private, and how they're funded and how their economies work. But as an enormous and well-regarded public institution, mm-hmm. we can really shape the lives and the economy of Texas as an energy sector, as an AI epicenter. People don't really appreciate the extraordinary strength of AI talent that we have in this little place called Austin and the University of Texas. the health ecosystem that's evolving with Del Med and MD Anderson. So we started this conversation saying, I have a knack for seeing where that opportunity exists. And I think we are at a point in time where this great institution that's old and, warts and all is finally ready to come together with entrepreneurship.
Nice.
And so it has to do with where the university is. It has to do with where the city of Austin is. It has to do with where the students are, the training with which they come into the ecosystem. And out of that, I hope we launch amazing companies that have solved some of the biggest challenges in the world and build great value. And that's what's in front of us. And if I can be a small part in shaping that and setting its trajectory for the future, if it genuinely feels like an honor. It sounds kind of, I don't know what to say that, but to be a part of shaping that is really cool. Because I'm at the point where I don't want to do my 10th company or.
But wait, I got an idea.
Yeah.
No, but it is so.
But I'd love to help you.
Well, yeah, and that's what I was going to say is that one of the other things about that university, right, and I've spent some time in it, is that there are so many resources, and you have to figure out how, if you're a law student, to connect to the petroleum engineering department or whatever it happened. So there's sort of this embarrassment of riches that's hard to navigate, and I think you're sort of at a unique hub, right, to assist those.
That's a great way to put it. It is an embarrassment of riches because it's extraordinary. From intellectual property that is generated by scientists and engineers and people who are researching, and they're not going to leave their beautiful, research careers. But there's people who want to start companies, and a vast majority of them don't have their own idea. Getting better about connecting that, accelerating them, connecting them to the outside world, and then. When you think about the reach of the alumni ecosystem of this university, connecting those dots, I mean, we're just going to have some wins, and it's going to be awesome.
I love it.
And I love being part of it. So, yeah, this is my final chapter in my career is going to be helping other people build companies and hopefully find themselves in the way. That's been a theme of our conversation. I don't know. It's just really cool to watch somebody become what they're becoming at any point in life.
Yeah.
I love it. Thanks so much for being with us. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This is great.
It's been fun. I could ask y'all a lot of questions. So we could...
Yeah, I know. I told Mellie, I was like, it's just going to be like when I come to your class, except I'm going to ask you the questions.
Yeah.
We'll have to have you in for another one then.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for always supporting the students.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Navigating Complexity with guest Dr. Mellie Price. We hope her stories and wisdom inspire you to embrace challenges and uncover the opportunities hidden within. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with others who might benefit from these insightful conversations. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and remember, complexity often holds the seeds of transformation.